Hey, and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. In this episode, I'm interviewing Mike Cowan-Jones. Now, Mike is a OT who has been working with neurodivergence for some years now, and we're going to talk about the importance of occupational therapy and how it can really be a positive in the lives of neurodivergent people. As I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before I go on, hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You'll always know when I've got new content coming up, and it makes a huge difference to who gets to see this. On top of that, it's a huge thing for me because you'll help me hit that 10,000 subscriber mark I'm really pushing towards. So please do go do that. Big favor. As I said before, I am interviewing today Mike Cowan-Jones. Mike, how are you today?
I'm good, Duncan, mate. How are you?
I'm very well. Mike, as I said before, you are an occupational therapist. It's a word we hear thrown around a lot, and everyone refers to OTs. But for you, I guess what is it to be an OT? What does it mean to you, and what can it mean for those who you serve, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, the problem is occupational therapy in itself has been hijacked by everyone else. And as OTs, we're not always very good at talking about it. So it's good to have an opportunity. I mean, there's a misrepresentation. Occupational therapy is often thought of as work occupation. And although that's a part of it, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
In essence, how we occupy ourselves is what we're interested in. So whether our role is as a child trying to get through day-to-day life, an adult trying to get to work, or even just somebody who needs to do the daily living activities like get to and from the toilet, get washed and dressed, what we should be doing is supporting that individual to achieve their aspirations. That's the bottom line.
That's really good. It's a conversation I've been having recently in my role with Devon Carers. Something that comes up is the word independence. And we've actually realized, I think, that that's not necessarily the best and most effective word. What really is should be empowerment, because
Yeah.
I think there is often a dependency. I think we all have dependencies in one way or another. I'm able-bodied and I'm neurotypical, but I have dependencies on people to support me in various ways. But I think that it's that thing of it is that empowerment, helping somebody to live their best life with as much independence as possible, but within reason. Would that be right?
I would argue that. I mean, it is something that the profession struggled with because it's always said it's enabling people to be independent. We've grown up a bit. We've realised that's not what it's about. But the interesting thing from my point of view is I've never looked at it that way. I've always struggled with the idea that I'm the therapist and I know best, when actually it's the person I'm working with who knows best. I'm there to be their guide,
Yeah.
to be their companion and get them to where they're going. And that really is what I enjoy about what I do.
One of the interesting things that you said in the stuff that you sent over was that you thought you understood neurodivergence.
Oh.
And then you kind of got thrust into, because you've got, I mean, it's probably good to establish here, you're not simply an occupational therapist. You are immediately adjacent as well, in that you have family who are neurodivergent.
I go back many, many, many years when I first qualified, which was way back in 1991. My very first post when I qualified was working not within neurodivergency, but on a stroke rehab unit. And I'd just come out from uni. Well, it wasn't uni back then. I'll tell you how old it was. We had the schools of occupational therapy. So not a university graduate at all in that sense. But I felt I knew all there was to know about what we called neurorehabilitation in those days. And I rock up and I'm doing my work. And the next thing I know, I'm called in to see the OT manager, who says, "Mike, I've had a few concerns mentioned about you. You think you know what you're doing, but these things went out of date actually a few years ago." And I'll say, "No, it can't do. I've just qualified. It's what being taught at uni." And I suppose that was my first eye-opener to the idea that just because you taught something doesn't mean you know it. But sadly, it still exists. I've got to say this. And I'm probably going to be shot by a number of my occupational therapy colleagues, and I'm quite prepared to stick my head above the parapet for that.
If we see it on the news, we'll know what happened.
Oh, yeah. I'm probably going to be struck off, never to practice again. But the reality is, whether it's teachers or social workers or OTs or physios or doctors or nurses, we all mean well, but until you've actually walked in someone's shoes or at least walked alongside them, you don't really know. And one of the skills I think we should be developing is that of listening and working in partnership with those who do know.
Yeah, that's bang on. We go on about it on this channel all the time. There's this element there of, I try and engage with neurodivergent people as much as possible because I can only understand it to a degree, and I need that input to do what I'm doing here, because if you don't have it, you're talking over a community, but B, you're talking from an uneducated perspective as well. I did an online course which was on understanding autism, which I thought might help with some of the stuff that I do and the people that I support. And I think I did about 2 weeks of it, and I had to stop because I was getting so angry with the out of date concepts that were in this current course that were talking about people with autism, not autistic people. It was making references to the fact that it was, predominantly a male neurodivergence is autism. It's not something that happens to females that often. And it was just so, I kept answering the questions as they wanted and then writing paragraphs afterwards about why it was wrong now. And then I just had to stop for my own mental health because I was getting so angry with it. But you're right. Things, I guess, migrate and move on so quickly, and our understandings move on so quickly, and it's so hard to get that out there and caught up with a lot of the time.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And the sad thing is, you're probably ranting and raving at me. I could have been your occupational therapist. I've worked a lot within social services, which is about adaptations, and it's very, very clear cut. And I've got to make this absolutely clear, I mean it with respect. But if somebody has a physical disability, it's relatively easy to work out what to do. You can argue that if you can't walk, you need a means of overcoming the steps, of overcoming the stairs, whatever it is. And it's fairly obvious. When someone talks about something that's very behaviourally driven, it's a lot more complex because there's, to be blunt, a lot more factors you can't easily and readily manage.
Yeah.
I mean, the classic one that used to come about, and it still does, and I genuinely feel it has moved on a lot. I'll give you a direct example. In our household, we're a 3-bedroomed household. We've got mom, dad, 3 children, and we've got 3 bedrooms. So the norm would be that you'd have perhaps mom and dad in a bedroom, a couple of the children share 1 bedroom, another child sharing another.
Yeah.
That's fine. Why do you need an additional bedroom would be the comment from the OT. Because we can create a safe space for your child. We can put a little pop-up tent in one corner, and that is their safe space. But in reality, all you're doing is saying, you know what? I've got a crate there for my dog. I'll pop my dog in there. And that's the same sort of thing for your child. You think, well, hang on a minute, that's not their safe space.
It reduces it to the animal-like thing almost, doesn't it? We had this issue because we were in a 2-bedroom house when my son was born. And that was okay for a little while because obviously Moses basket in with us. But what we discovered, we were told basically directly, is that he's not going to be safe with my daughter, with them both in the same room, because if she decides to act out, he's going to be directly threatened. So we were lucky in that was recognised, and we had to move to a 3-bedroom property for that very reason. But it's this thing of this understanding that I think so often the professional side of things forgets the humanity, and I can understand why. It's a criticism, but not a criticism, if you like, because I think it's a natural thing. You start to, in any job you do, you start to think. I used to work at an accounting firm. I was just on the admin side of things, but you forget that they're people. They're just information on a page, and you start to process it that way. But when that leaks over into things where I think the medical profession and the health profession in general, it can be very easy to fall into that and forget that these are not simply, it's not like I'm just preparing a tax return. This is, you're affecting somebody's life and their well-being and their quality of life moving forward.
I mean, I can't comment on everyone else, but I can comment that from my point of view, I've always felt that this is a person I'm working with. Got that? That's fine. Yeah. The problem is that I've thought I'm the one who's now the occupational therapist, the qualified one. I'm the one who knows better than you. And it doesn't help because I was brought up in a time when we had programs which I bear not name drop for fear of slander, but it might have been akin to Wonder Woman Childminder.
I know the one you mean. I'm prepared to say name and shame. I can't stand the woman. And
it dealt an awful lot with steps. And I don't mean the musical group. Although, to be honest, if we played Steps to my kids, that'd probably be as much of a behavioural deterrent as anything else. But that's no, I don't mean it, Steps. I love you, honestly. 2, 4, 6, 8. You're brilliant. I promise you.
But you're talking. I'll say you're talking about Super Nanny, and she recently went on and did a tweet that I'll directly address, which was that we're too wrapped up in the word. We don't want to admit that our kids are naughty anymore. and everyone's getting a diagnosis of this, that, and the other, and it's just wrong. I was fuming at it because it is just so ill-educated, and she just clearly wants to be relevant again.
The big misunderstanding, isn't it? Because what people don't seem to understand in general is that children don't misbehave because they're naughty. Children misbehave, and I'll use that word advisedly, because they're trying to communicate something.
It's an unmet need.
The problem is we haven't an idea what the is going on. Yeah.
Especially when it comes to neurodivergence, because the brain's working in a different way to the majority of us in the world who are neurotypical, just don't understand the different processing, if you like, and becomes confusing to us. And so actually, that's just wrong. And that is wrong in itself.
It's a valid point. And I mean, I don't know about you and how you dealt with things as your child and children grown up, but there's a lot of stuff that I did, which if I allowed myself, I could beat myself up metaphorically and physically every day because I was lousy. I do not hold with smacking. Okay, but here we go. Confession going out to all of you guys watching at home. So I'm asking for you, please, to understand and forgive me. This was a past life, but I have smacked my children. I have. But the problem is that every time I've done that, it's because I've then recognized I've lost control, and it's made no difference whatsoever to the behavior. Now I understand, and understand that actually seeing the sight of me walking up, hand raised, was absolutely petrifying, because my daughter is the one I'm thinking about now. To be quite frank, she couldn't do anything about how she was displaying her behavior because everything else was just too overwhelming and we couldn't deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem is no one told me, so I couldn't deal with it either.
I look back often and regret the actions of the past and the way I dealt with things. And even if it was just losing my rag and shouting or overreacting to a situation, you look back and you realize it was just the wrong thing to do, because it just exacerbated the situation. In fact, it did the opposite to what I wanted to achieve with it. And it's still something, you catch yourself every now and again, and you still fall into these things because, like you say, you get pushed to a point yourself. And I think it's important for parents, for carers, for anybody out there to understand you're human. It's learning from the mistakes of the past and moving on. I'm a big believer in that. I think I could, like you say, I could be self-flagellating and, whip my back all day, every day over the mistakes that are made. But that's not helping anyone. What's helping is that I've learned from those mistakes and I've moved on, and I try and adapt that into my approach now. I mean, you've opened up a really interesting topic there, because obviously you said you were trained in this way, you've had this life, you had an understanding, and then you found out, even a couple of months after you're qualified, it's out of date. You then got really thrust into the world of neurodivergence and autism. How did that occur?
Okay, so, I mean, there's a couple of distinctions here. Professionally, I've dealt with neurodivergency for many years, right? But not directly as an OT treating someone who's neurodiverse. It's been an OT who's been working within the adaptations environment, or maybe we've come across people who come into an acute hospital setting, and we haven't recognized the implications of their neurodiverse condition. In fact, here's another thing that we can go down and investigate further on as well, which is how many of us could be neurodiverse without ever realizing it, because we grew up in an age where it was naughty behavior. No one understood that. And that's something else we can discuss as well, I guess.
Well, I know so many parents and of neurodivergent kids who have realized their own neurodiversity because they've realized in fact, I spoke to a chap, he was my best man, he was my best mate back in Australia, recently, in the last few years, diagnosed ADHD. And it was, he had no idea. It was only that he was comparing himself to his nephew, and his nephew got diagnosed, and he was like, everyone tells me I'm just like he's just like I was when I was a kid. And it started to ring true. And obviously Chris, Grumpy gets Chris.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So I wasn't working directly with people that were neurodiverse so much. It was more case that was coming into people who had autism, ADHD, attention deficit disorder through my role within social services, the adaptations process. And when I was working within hospitals as well, the acute sector. And you'd come across folks, and we always made the argument, before we looked at adaptations, it was almost like, and again, I'm going to do my reputation no good here at all. It was almost like we were there to gatekeep. We were there to stop people getting the adaptations rather than recognizing the importance that we do now, because
Yeah.
the home facilities grant guidance has been revised, but rather than recognizing the importance of the adaptation to keep families together and support. So our argument was always, it must be the parents. What are they doing wrong?
I've
Where's the
spoken
behavior?
about this so often. Parent blame,
Oh, I know.
such a huge thing. And yeah, we went through it badly. Yeah.
But it's very much the way we're brought up, in a sense, professionally, to look at that.
Trained that way. Yeah.
Yeah, we were. And it was only when let's let's put this in perspective. Our middle daughter, who is the inspiration, by the way, why I'm involved with her in doing a lot of autism awareness talks, and I got involved that way. It's only when she was born and we started to go through the process with her that I began to realize, hang on, you pigging professionals here, you criticizing me and my wife for the way we're parenting. We're doing nothing different with this child, what we did with our first.
Yeah.
So what have we got a problem? And of course, and you'll know this as well, we've got a couple of dilemmas. That the first one is that girls, of course, are not autistic because they mask so brilliantly. And don't get me wrong, I know boys can mask as well. It's very much generalized.
Far more common in girls, and yeah.
So it was a case of no, we don't see any problems at all, because they were classed, and I really detest this phrase, as does my daughter, as high functioning autism. That was the eventual diagnosis. And you think, what? It's only high functioning if you're in the right environment. And that's more than just the physical environment.
And they've done
the mental state of mood, mind, etc.
They're moving away from this line of thought now, because they're realizing that what appears to be high functioning completely detracts, especially if someone's masking, the turmoil, the anxiety, and the everything going on inside is just hidden. It doesn't mean they're high functioning. It just means that they are displaying a level of functioning that may not even be real, because it can be echolalia, it can be, say, masking, it can be so many different things contributing to that. And actually it's just hiding a much more complex situation underneath.
No, you're spot on. And every morning waking up to go to school and saying, I've got stomachache. And of course, I'm of an age where I was brought up where our parents, I don't know about yours, but mine certainly said, well, stomachache's just an excuse for not going to school.
I needed to have a limb hanging off before I was allowed a day off school.
Oh, yeah. Okay, slightly different story, but just make the point. Our eldest daughter, who grew up as young carer to her other two sisters who are diagnosed as being autistic, she was also put through the mill by saying, you do go to school regardless. She was complaining about having a stomach problem, that then became a groin problem, that became a leg problem. And eventually we thought, this has been going on for weeks. Perhaps you better go and see the doctor. It was only then that she got diagnosed as having a UTI, and poor mum and dad had
genuinely, this is a true story. My dad's going to cringe if he watches this, but it is just a funny story. When I must have been 7, 8, he'd bought me a bike, and I was coming down. He lived on quite a steep hill, and I was coming down the road on the bike, and I've hit the driveways were recessed, so you can obviously get it. So, and it's this dip, and I got that and just caught it wrong, went over the handlebars, and I was complaining, my arms hurting, and he's like, but I could move it. And so he was like, there's nothing wrong. And he was even great. He's like, there's nothing wrong. Look, you can see there's nothing wrong. And I'm like, He got me home to my mum, and my mum was like, you've got to take him to the hospital right now. Come on, He was like, moaning all the way. It's a bloody waste of time. This is ridiculous. Got there. It's a hairline fracture, hence why it was. Yeah, he's never forgotten it. He felt so bad. I actually feel bad for him now, because he was just, like you say, he was acting from his era and all that kind of stuff. And like I say, it literally had to be hanging off before I was given any kind of attention for that.
And please tell me you reminded him of that every birthday and every Christmas since.
Constantly, every time I ask for money.
But this idea about stomachache, it's very, very real, because of course one of the symptoms of anxiety is that gut-wrenching stomach ache, isn't it? We know that's a genuine symptom. So every single day, not knowing what was lined up ahead of her, not knowing how to cope with that blooming irritating label on the back, which you're meant to wear because it is your uniform, not being able to cope with the bright sunshine as we have to walk round, having to make do with these lovely shiny patented shoes, but they rub and hold against you, and having to deal with all the noise and hubbub around the classroom. No wonder she was in a constant state of anxiety.
Not only that, I mean, the understanding now of sensory processing disorder, which so often accompanies neurodivergence in so many ways, and understanding that it's the brain can process a discomfort from something around, so sound, noise, eye contact. It can process it physically and become an actual pain. So you're actually adding to the possible list of reasons why it could actually be a physical pain that's being displayed, especially if it's high anxiety area, and school is a high anxiety place.
Absolutely. And of course, but when she turns up at school, she'd settled down, she'd worked well, she was achieving high marks in her classes. Okay, she didn't volunteer any information, but if you directly pointed at her, anxiety provoking, but if you directly pointed her, she'd answer a question.
Yeah.
So therefore, it must be what you're doing, mum and dad, at home. And that is the most irritating thing there is. To give you a very brief family history, put this in perspective. We have one eldest daughter. She's now 18, got a life ahead of her, which is excellent. And as far as we're aware, and bear with me, everyone at home listening, because this isn't going to sound right in many ways, but I think you'll relate to where I'm coming from. She was the perfect little girl. Yes, at 6 weeks of age, quietly sleeping in a cot, no problems at all. She grew up, she was fine, that was okay. And that's why we thought this would be perfect when we have our second daughter. Now, I'm going to use everything which is wrong, but there's a deliberate reason for this, because this is what went through my mind at the time. And I'm going to make this absolutely clear. This is not how I feel. I never genuinely felt it, but it's the sort of things that go through your mind. So you end up then with the next daughter who does not settle at all. She does not settle to bed. And when you're up again for the third or fourth time during that night, several months on, not just several days or weeks on, you do start to think, oh my goodness, what has gone wrong? What happened to you? And you go into blame culture, either to the child, which was there for a while, or to yourself, into guilt, and think, what have we done wrong? What is going wrong there? But we get through it, and a few things like there was delays in independent toileting and delays in speech. My gosh, now we can't stop her when she gets going, but that's the way it was then. But nothing which made us worry, because we thought, well, we've been through it once. Daughter one, I mean, we had the midwife saying, you ought to be concerned she's not keeping her food down, but she did eventually, she's fine. We don't need these healthcare professionals. I'm a healthcare professional. I know what I'm talking about. And then you go through the process of nursery and the traditional school nativity. Well, it wasn't school; it was nursery, preschool. And why was she in tears for the nativity play? Our other daughter was fine, but yet she was in tears. But she was with the people she liked and all the rest of it. And then you get to the school run. And the school we had is the eldest daughter got dropped off at one site, and a 10-minute walk took you to the next. And my middle daughter, the one who does all the talks with me now, she would just stand there and cry and flap her arms, which we never realized at the time, but now we realize was a giveaway, and would demand in tears to be carried. Dad, meanwhile, quoting your world famous, yes, we'll just leave her as Wonder Woman person, say, no, you are going to walk, and we're going to wait here until you do. And if you don't, I'm going to report you to the head teacher, which we did. And guess what? It made no difference. No difference whatsoever. So then, of course, although the head teacher was sympathetic, and I have to be fair, she's now retired from teaching, she's a very good friend of ours, it was a case that they didn't recognise what was going on either. So there must be something going on at home. And that really began the journey. And we began to think, this ain't right. This ain't right at all. And we started to do our own research. And we started to think we need a psychology assessment, and we need to look into this further. And eventually she gets diagnosed just as she's going to transition. This is where one of my big bugbears is as well, Duncan, is that you get a diagnosis and then it stops.
Yep.
There's always the support. And what happened was end of year 6, which is as we're leaving primary school, back to start secondary, there's your diagnosis.
It is a nightmare, and there's so much support out there, but it's one of the things that obviously Devon Carers and DIAS as well, who I work with, which is Devon's form of SENDIAS. There's so much support out there, but there's no direction to it. And it's something we're trying to address with local council at the moment, because it's something that I remember when we got our diagnosis, it came through and it was a letter, and it was like, entirely expected everything that, because we've been 8 years it took us for the same reasons, girls can't have autism, all that kind of crap. It came through, and there was a sheet attached. Here's where you can go for extra support. And it was a list, honestly, a printed sheet of paper with written links, which were like 600 characters each. Just it's like, you got to be kidding, haven't you? You can't click. It wasn't even emailed. You couldn't click on them. And it was ridiculous. I was in the fortunate position, obviously, of doing what I do now. And I was, by the time we got diagnosis, I was well entrenched and knew where to go for support. But so many parents, so many carers get this and it's just dumped on their lap. And it's like, there you go. All done. Off you go. Right. And you just, great. What do I do next?
Warning, discussion around suicide follows.
Ours went a very different way, and this is where the story takes a turn to the black area, as it were, the darkness of despair. Because regrettably, what happened was that my daughter then tried tying her dressing gown cord around her neck, attaching it to her bunk bed, and what we believed was an attempt at suicide. Because with the transition from a smaller school, not small, but smaller, to a big school, because of where we live geographically, it's going to be a school where her mates weren't going to be. And in fact, one of her best mates has started to dump her, which now we probably realise was because she didn't understand about the difficulties of the social interaction that comes with an autistic child. But this put us in touch, of course, with the crisis team, because as we had to do, we went and spoke to the GP about it. But then this is what happens as well, and this is what's so wrong. This is why I feel so passionate about making, and Rhiannon, I'm going to mention names. Why not? Rhiannon is very much a speaker here. In fact, you're very proud he's a Grumpy Git, sponsored with Disability Expo, and we will be there. So you come and meet us in person, guys. We're going to be there the 2 days. But this is one of the issues. To get an assessment, and this is a mental health assessment for a girl who is autistic, newly diagnosed. She has to turn up at a general hospital, which is basically a physical hospital ward with the adjusting, profiling beds, the clinical curtains. It's very clinical. And yes, one of us could stay. My wife chose to stay, but she's on a camp bed next to her. And all that we got at the end of that after 24 hours was, yeah, there you go. As you said, there's a contact list. Off you go.
I can honestly, that echoes our experience. So we had the diagnosis, but we were getting nothing from, it was dismissed from CAMS, dismissed from everything else because it was all done. And it took a very similar situation. And my daughter was admitted to hospital and we were in for 4 days. And I was the one there with her for this. So I was the one on the, it wasn't a give count. It was a chair. I had to sit in a chair, right. And sit in a chair and next to her because she needed 24-hour monitoring at that point because she was a threat to herself, but others as well. The difference, I think, for us was that really triggered a lot of support because she finally got a proper psych assessment because the rules, I don't know if they're the same now, but they certainly were then, were if you're admitted and it's a psychological issue, you have to have a psych assessment on the spot. And that was done. And the CAMS lady was there. And I had the added blessing, big inverted commas, but my daughter had a huge meltdown. It wasn't even the biggest. In fact, it was moderate by her standards at the time. And the CAMS worker was there when it happened. In fact, she was on her own with her, and I had to run in to deal with the situation and keep everyone safe. So the fact that she'd seen it firsthand was a big plus on the sense that she wasn't just processing secondary information. It was on her watch, okay, it comes out of nowhere. It's like, yeah, this is what we, But yeah, it's horrific, and it is shocking that it comes to that. The system at the moment seems to be so geared toward things have to reach crisis point before anything gets done.
And I've got to be fair, Duncan, although I've said we got the information sheet, we did get followed up by CAMS. But here's the tricky bit. We've also had this experience where there's a case of being passed from pillar to post and then back again. Yeah. Okay, you've got anxiety, you've got depression. That must be mental health. Yes, but you've got autism. That's what they say. You've got autism, not you are autistic. As if you can just suss it out to get rid of it. It's an integral part of that person. But you've got autism, therefore you go to the autism-rated services. Yes, but your presenter's been depressed and anxious, therefore you go back to those services. Now, eventually, we got a really good psychiatrist involved who formed a brilliant relationship with Rhiannon. And it didn't happen overnight. One of the things that you again, many people relate to this, you don't just form a relationship, you have to build up trust.
Mm.
You don't open up straight away. You have to be accepted for what you are. And there's Rhiannon often talks about there being an aura around somebody, and she can pick up fairly quickly what that aura is. And I know you've done a very interesting post before on empathy, and it's been misunderstood about autistic not having empathy. Yeah. But as a consequence of that, we started to make progress. And what we now realize, and we've treated our youngest daughter very differently here, is that the mental health distress, although not always, because obviously an autistic person has the same trauma as anyone else, but it's often secondary to the sensory issues not being managed well. I have, for my sins, been a chair of governors at a school, right? Which is interesting because I can't stand the education system.
The same, yeah.
Oh my gosh, Duncan, you are my long lost twin. It's maybe not identical, but you're definitely my long lost twin. There's an expectation, and you see it all the time on Twitter, Facebook, and other feeds, right? There's an expectation that your child will attend 100% of the time. Yep. They will be there on time. And there's no recognition of the fact that actually that in itself is stressful. We now have what I call sensory overload days when the school asks, which is we know, particularly as the term progresses, that there comes a point where Rhiannon and her younger sister, now because we recognise this, will say, I'm just too tired to go in. And whereas previously what we'd say is, no, you must go in, school expects you to, and we push them in, and then we'd have the mental distress as a result. Now we say, okay, that's fine. Doesn't matter if it's a day, 2 days, whatever, we'll take it day by day. You won't go in. And when the school says, why aren't they in? Sensory overload. Oh, okay, now. They haven't a clue what the hell I'm talking about.
They don't have
They're knackered.
You've got it sorted. It is this expectation that's there that everyone should fit into this nice, convenient little box. But you've got so much of this stuff. I mean, the tragedies, and this is a topic for I'm actually doing an interview with someone coming up, which is going to be talking about this, but the new schools bill that everyone is opposing who is involved with, like, sorry, the PDA Society, who I ambassador for as well, they're vehemently against it. The whole thing is basically boxing out completely the need for understanding of neurodivergence and adaptation to make school environments better for them. And it's just awful. And this whole thing of attendance is just such a big thing. Even my daughter's at a SEND school, and they've had to start rabbiting on about it because the local council were on with them about attendance as well. And it's like, it's just this lack of understanding.
You say that my eldest, not my eldest, but my Rhiannon's over at what's known as a PRU, which is a pupil referral unit, and has been for 2 years. Even though she's now got an education healthcare plan, it would not be in her interest to move, which is fair enough. Not now, not now, not till she starts college in September. But this is another issue. Education and healthcare plans, which are legally binding documents. So do read them very carefully, guys, when you get them. Read it very carefully. Make sure it specifically states the sort of staff and support that should be there, because otherwise they can wrangle out of it.
And you have every right when you get that. If you see something you think is wrong, you have the right to appeal it and get it put in. You have
very, very much so. Endorse that fully. And don't feel pressure to sign it off until you're happy. Definitely not. But despite the fact she'd been at a PRU for 2 years, when we originally applied for an education healthcare plan, we got a letter back from the local authorities saying, because your daughter attends mainstream school, she doesn't qualify. We said, hang on a minute. She's in your flipping local authority. She's not at the mainstream school, even though she's on their roll. She's at this PRU. It is frustrating. But you mentioned about PDA, pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah.
It very much is real. But again, different local authorities will tell you, no, it doesn't exist.
Only 30% of the UK will recognise it.
It's a load of rubbish.
Yeah. It really is.
I shall use my words professionally.
It's absolute rubbish. And there's so many, the more we're learning about neurodivergence and the more we're starting to understand it, you see these things as just so much more widespread than people realise. PDA is still listed as a rare form of autism, but my experience is, the PDA is a lot more common than people think. But actually, there's another aspect there, which is just standard autistic demand avoidance, which standard, but it still presents, the same challenges. It's just not got the pathological element to it that is there. I'm going to round up just because we're going to go. Well, I think we'll have to do another one of these down the track because
count me in on that.
It's been really interesting. But I think you are going to be at the Disability Expo. You mentioned it before in July.
Yeah, we're all going to be there. I have been humbly offered the role of SEN Parent Ambassador at Disability Expo. Now, I've got imposter syndrome because I have no idea why it's me. I genuinely haven't. There's lots of people who know a lot of stuff about autism, other neurodivergent conditions in the SEN system, and yet somehow I've got this role. But we're going to be there for the 2 days. We're going to be doing some speaking there as well. Rhiannon will be up there. The rest of the family will be there. But bear in mind, it's lots of other stuff, sensory areas, computer areas, gaming areas. So you might actually find people just wandering around, not necessarily the stand we've got either.
Fantastic. Well, obviously the Grumpy Gits will be there, so I'll be there as well. So I look forward to seeing you again face to face. Mike, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for talking this. And as I say, we'll do this again because I think there's so much more we can discuss and knuckle down into. But yeah, thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Duncan. Take care, mate.
Please do go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell so you know when new content's coming up. And we'd love to hear your feedback as well. If you've had anything that resonates with this, or if you've got something to say on the systems that are there or experiences you've had, please do put it in the comments because I love hearing your stories and it's something I can share with Mike as well and we can hopefully respond to. I will see you again on the next episode. Please do, in the meantime, stay safe.